everyone, Professor Christina here, and I wanted to talk to you a little bit briefly about Hofstede's cultural dimensions for this week's chapter. I know you guys have an assignment coming up watching the Meet the Parents clip from the Joy Luck Club, and so I wanted to kind of assist you and talk a little bit about these dimensions so you can better understand what these dimensions are and also be able to reflect on your own culture and how you identify yourself and how you can see the stark differences of these dimensions that you perpetuate in your daily life. Okay, so really quickly, I'm going to share my screen with you so you can see a little bit about what I use in terms of slides. And so as you may know now, you can always access your information under every knowledge building page on a module. So last week we kind of talked about just the basics of interpersonal in general, and now this week we're diving into culture. All right, so if you click on the knowledge building tab, you'll always see the Prezi that I provide for you for each chapter, along with this Zoom lecture, right? That's going to be posted for you once this recording is available. But like I said, I wanted to quickly talk about Hofstede's cultural dimensions because I find that, you know, sometimes reading this type of information can be a little confusing, and I wanted to use my own examples of my daily life and my own culture that I identify with as a Vietnamese American woman to help you kind of understand a little bit more about these dimensions, okay? And so really quickly, I know that there are a few more dimensions that are mentioned in the textbook, but I'm only really going to be talking about 4, right? We're going to first talk about high versus low context and then move our way down, all right? So first, when you think of high versus low context, right? When you think of context, I want you to think of language or verbal and nonverbal communication, okay? And so typically what happens is low context cultures, all right? These cultures usually use a language that express thoughts, ideas, and feelings as directly as possible. And if you're not aware, the USA is a very low context culture. We say what we mean, we say what we feel. We're all about, you know, freedom of speech, right? And so a lot of this reflects our cultures and our values. And so yes, we are very low context cultures. However, that could be detrimental to us because we can be poor at decoding nonverbal behavior. Or, right, we can come off as arrogant or rude or disruptive because we are having the ability to speak our minds, okay? Whereas high context cultures rely more on nonverbal communication. So this is kind of the idea of it's not what you said, it's how you said it, okay? And so it relies awfully on subtle nonverbal cues to maintain social harmony. So a lot of high context cultures tend to avoid saying how they feel directly to avoid being singled out or to avoid to offend anybody, right? And as you can see, a lot of third world countries that are having, like, let's say communist government like Vietnam, for example, right? Saying what you feel and being direct and blatant like the US isn't necessarily a positive thing in that particular culture, okay? For example, again, I identify as Vietnamese American, but my mom was born and raised in Vietnam, and she immigrated to the United States. And I know when I ask her to do something and she says maybe, I know it's a no, right? And so it's hard sometimes for people to say no. Whereas in the American culture, I don't know about you, but I'm learning to be more direct and learning to say no and being okay with setting those boundaries and say no, thank you, right? Whereas my mom, she has a really hard time doing that because, again, the way in which you are told in that particular culture to communicate, you don't want to offend anybody. And so you say, maybe, yeah, that sounds great. When in reality, you're not going to go, or you really mean no. Okay, so it's the subtle nonverbal cues over the direct verbal language. Okay, and so again, this is just something that you can go over on your own, but low context cultures, like I said, are more specific, detailed, and precise in their verbal language. Okay, and high context cultures heavily rely on more nonverbal, and the language is less direct. When it comes to, let's say, religion, for example, evangelists are known to be taking the Bible word for word, right? And so that would be a little bit more low context, whereas what they say is what they mean, okay? Whereas high context cultures, there's a lot of there's subjectivity and there's a lot of multiple meanings. So for example, Buddhism, right, can be a very high context culture type of religion because the way in which their language is expressed, there's a lot of subjectivity, right? You can pretty much interpret it in many different ways. But like I said, whether evangelists, for example, right, they're more direct, they're very straightforward in terms of implying or identifying what's in the Bible, right? So just a heads up or an example of what that can play out in everyday life, okay? The next dimension that we're going to focus on is cultures that are individualistic versus cultures that are collectivistic. And this is the degree of interdependence. And so you're going to see the word interdependence a lot in this class because inter is between, right? Dependence is the connection between other people. And that just essentially means that how high or how much is there an effect on other people based on your behaviors or attitudes. So we're all intertwined, right? But how much intertwined are we, depending on the culture that you identify with? So the USA, we are very individualistic. I think we are the highest individualistic culture in the world, okay? And we have the me mentality. And to preface this, I don't want you to think that we are selfish people because, you know yourself and you know that like, okay, I could be selfish in some ways, but we're not all, right? We don't want to lump everybody as a whole, like we're all selfish people, it's all about me. However, it can come off as selfish or come off as rude or arrogant, like I said before, because not all cultures are comfortable or even aware of individualistic characteristics, okay? And so individualistic cultures tend to have the primary responsibility to help oneself and their immediate family, and everybody else is like, good luck, right? Good for you, but this is my route and this is how I'm going to do and this is what I'm going to do to succeed. And the biggest example with that would be the American dream, right? So this American dream is this ideology where if you work hard and you put work into it, and if you do everything right, you can achieve your American dream. And again, that's ingrained in our culture and who we are. And that's a very individualistic way of thinking, right? Those of you that might not be close to your neighbors, let's say if you live in an apartment complex or if you live in a cul-de-sac, for example, you might not be all friendly with your neighbors because, again, just because they're neighbors, you guys coexist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to intertwine your lives together at all, right? And so that is very common with individualistic type of cultures. And then in contrast, collectivistic cultures, right, have a we mentality. So the obligation is with the group and everybody is, again, interdependent, very interdependent upon each other, right? And so loyalties and obligations are due to family, extended family, work organizations, culture. This is a more of, like I said, a we mentality. Okay, again, another example would be, again, my mom is from Vietnam, and those of you that identify with being Vietnamese or Vietnamese American, we have a huge emphasis on family and extended family. And so if you immigrated to the United States, right, you made it. And so what you have to do, or what's obligated of you very subtly, is that you have to support your family that is from Vietnam. And so what happens is my mom would send money to my extended family back in Vietnam. And as I've gotten older, there's this huge pressure for me to do that as well. But again, I was born and raised in the United States, so my individualistic side came out. It's like, as much as I love my family members, my money is my money, and I don't know how comfortable I feel with, feeling obligated to do these things. And of course, from my mom's perspective, that comes off as really offensive and really disrespectful. Whereas, again, in my perspective, in my side, like, again, we live in a very individualistic society. And so we are allowed to control our finances, our bodies, etc. And so it might be difficult for a collectivistic culture to understand individualistic ways and vice versa, right? Not to say that, Americans are always about themselves. I don't want you to think that at all, but the degree in which, right, the involvement or interdependence that they have with other people is very limited compared to, like I said, collectivistic cultures, okay? And so moving on to the next dimension. So again, you can read this on your own, just gives you a little bit more examples of individualistic versus collectivistic. Anyways, so moving on to the third dimension, which is high power distance. And so some cultures have high power distance and some cultures have low power distance. And this refers to the attitude of a culture towards power inequalities, okay? And so I don't want you to think of power as a brute strength, but power as in respect and hierarchy, okay? And surprisingly enough, the US has, we're more of a low context culture. And so we try to create equality, right? And so it's an equal distribution of power, or inequalities are minimized to an extent, right? Because we can talk about corruption and politics and corporate all we want, right? Or corporations all we want. But for the most part, right, we are more geared towards low power because, right, let's say there is a basic minimum wage, right? And if you feel like your rights or your wages are being violated, well, guess what? Like, you have places and outlets to go to make sure that you have the rights as an employee to get what you deserve, right? We can go on strike. We have the right to do that. We have unions. We have all of these kind of infrastructures to protect, right, the little man or the lower parts of the hierarchy, okay? Everybody past 18 is allowed to vote, right? And so all of these kind of power structures are a little bit more minimized in our culture because we have that freedom to do so. Whereas high power distance cultures, an unequal distribution of power is actually encouraged. And so one rules very many, okay? So think of like the Philippines, for example. As much as there is a president, right, the president has the full and complete say about what the culture and country does. And deviating from that norm, right, is considered criminal or bad. Also, this can be perpetuated in family dynamics, okay, as well. So high power distance cultures, again, those of you that identify with any Southeast Asian culture or Hispanic or Latino culture in general, you know that, like, if they are older than you and your family, you must respect what they say, must respect them as a person, even if what they say is incorrect, right? There is a level or a hierarchy. In the Vietnamese language, again, we label people based on their age and based on their status in their family. And so I always kind of talk to my partner and let them know that, you know, this aunt is technically, we call her aunt number 5, but she has a real, like, legal name, but because of where she is in her in our family, she's the 5th child. So that's why she's Lady 5 in direct English translation. Whereas, again, in America or in the English language, not necessarily the same thing, okay? And so I don't want you to think of, like, power distance as just terms of, like, government, but it also comes from the family dynamic and the system itself, right? And so think of, like, who controls the family, who's the breadwinner, or who's, like, you know, the matriarch or the patriarch, and what that does to the dynamic of a culture or a family system as a whole, okay? So again, I also give you some examples of the differences between low power and high power distance for you to read on your own, okay? This is also an example of, again, high versus low power distance, and it's in South Korea. So the Sewol boat ferry accident happened a while back, I believe in 2014. But if you click on this link, it will tell you that about this accident, and unfortunately, there are high school students that were told to stay in their rooms while the boat was sinking, and unfortunately they listened to their superiors and their teachers, again, high power distance, and unfortunately they drowned in their rooms because they were just behaving protocol. Whereas, again, in more low power distance cultures, right, in situations like that, we may be more inclined to kind of deviate from that, that order and try to save ourselves, right? And so it's just a way for you to kind of have a real life example of what that means. Okay. And last but not least, achievement versus nurturing. And this used to be called masculine versus feminine, but like I said, again, like a gender in characteristics themselves are very fluid, and so we need to kind of acknowledge them as fluid. And this refers to a culture's emphasis on achievement or nurture. And I don't want you to think that, like, you know, because a culture is nurturing, that they're automatically considered all feminine or female. Like, that's not the case, right? We're just saying that, like, some cultures really rely on achievement or use that as the emphasis of everyday life versus nurture. And so we are an achievement-based culture. Okay, so a culture that emphasizes ambition, acquisition of wealth, and differentiated gender roles. Okay, so that's really important to note. Again, Americans, when you look at politics and look at climate change and look at all of these kind of big issues, Americans or the American culture really emphasizes wealth and money, right? And so being able to get a job, earn money to, you know, succeed in your American dream, again, like I'm saying, like this is a part of our everyday culture and life. Differentiated gender roles, as in there is a sort of appropriateness for what women can do and what men can do. And we can say this over and over again, but again, women are paid less than men to do the same job in the United States. And so there's still, again, there's progression, right? But there's still not enough to where we can say, yeah, you know, males and females are treated equally, all right? Nurturing cultures are more fluid. Okay, and so cultures that stress caring and nurturing behaviors, sexuality equality, environmental awareness, and more fluid gender roles. And a big example of this would be either Switzerland or Sweden or any parts of that area in Europe, is that, like, in the US, there is maternity leave. Yes, there is paternity leave. But in Switzerland and those areas of Europe, both parents, right, get maternity and paternity leave, regardless of parent, to be able to stay at home and nurture the child. And stay-at-home dads, right, versus stay-at-home moms. Like, it doesn't matter in terms of the culture who stays at home, but as long as there is a parental figure. And so that's what it means by more fluid gender roles, right? And so it's not just, you know, a male versus female relationship anymore. It's male, female, depending on, again, your sexual identity. These cultures more heavily rely on the ideology of, like, parenting themselves rather than, like, which gender does which role. Okay, and again, environmental awareness, being one with your surroundings and being one with the cultures. And I would suggest doing a little bit of research on Japan and the Japanese culture, and how, as much as they can be achievement-based, there are some values of nourishment or nurturing where they're trying to coexist with their environment. Okay. And so when you're watching the clip for the Meet the Parents assignment, I want you to pay attention to these things, right? So Rich and Waverly come from two different worlds. And as much as they are in America and one's Americanized and one has their family immigrated to the United States, there are key differences that I want you to know. And hopefully this video helped you a little bit to learn more about not only your culture, but the dimensions themselves, okay? So again, if you have any questions of the dimensions, please feel free to email or Canvas message me and I can assist you further. All right. So I hope you enjoy your assignment this week, and I hope you enjoy our discussion about culture and where you're from and how you see your world. And hopefully we can contribute to a healthy discussion this week. All right. Take care.